Hello and welcome back. We're here in the studio today with the American Family Association Presents. Our guest is Bill Donahue, president of the Catholic League and author of the new hard-hitting book, Secular Sabotage: How Liberals Are Destroying Religion and Culture in America. Bill, again, very hard-hitting book. You hit different segments of society that seem to be attacking our culture. We were talking a little bit about Hollywood. You were talking about some of these shows and movies.
Right. Example, The Golden Compass, written by Philip Pullman, the English atheist. He made a movie on that, which came out in December of 2007. Now, I call for a boycott. Why? Was the movie anti-Catholic? Not actually. They toned down the anti-Catholic elements that were in the book. And as I said just before the break, Frank, I said this next book, was Subtle Knife, was more anti-Catholic than The Golden Compass, and the third volume, Amber Spyglass, was the most profoundly anti-Catholic. My argument back in 2007 was this. The movie was book for the bait. In other words, unsuspecting Christian parents may want to take their little Johnny to see the Golden Compass movie, find out that it's fairly innocuous, not really anti-Catholic, and then think, you know what, I'll buy the trilogy, Pullman's 3 books, for Johnny for Christmas. Now you have unwittingly introduced him to the wonders of atheism and the horrors of Catholicism. I thought that was basically anti-Catholicism, backdoor, deceitful. I drew attention to it. I called for a boycott. And the most recent example I can tell you that I won, in December of 2009, I was contacted by the newspapers in England to verify that, Bill Donahue, you succeeded. There will not be movie 2. There will not be movie 3, because we hurt them in the box office so severely in the United States with The Golden Compass in 2007. They thought it was a losing proposition. I'm very proud of what we did. It's a First Amendment right that I have to organize a boycott.
Bill, tell us a little bit about your education.
Yes, I have my bachelor's degree from New York University in sociology. I received that degree back in 1972. I had previously spent 4 years in the United States Air Force during the Vietnam War, and I was honorably discharged in 1970. Then I got my master's degree from the New School for Social Research and Sociology in 1974. I went to work at Spanish Harlem in a Catholic elementary school in a rough area in New York City in Spanish Harlem in the 1970s while I was working on my doctorate. Then I took a position as a professor at La Roche College in Pittsburgh in 77, was awarded my PhD from New York University in 1980. And then I spent 16 years as a professor, a year at the Heritage Foundation, where I wrote another book. I've written several books on the American Civil Liberties Union. And then I finally took over, came back home to New York, my home, in 1993 to take over the Catholic League.
You have experienced then higher education, academia, the ivory tower. Where do they stand on these issues that we're talking about when you talk of secular sabotage?
Right. I think if somebody wanted to find, let's say you were a Martian and you dropped into the United States here in 2010, and somebody said, you know what, I've heard about you have some tolerant people in the United States, and I've heard you actually have some very intolerant people. Where can I find, very quickly, the most intolerant people in the United States of America? I would say go into the local college. Go into the local university. Particularly try to get into the humanities, though.
But I thought this is a part of society that they're very open-minded.
I have never seen more closed-minded, intolerant people in my entire life.
What are they intolerant of?
Well, first of all, many of them are miserably unhappy people themselves. Many of them are anti-American, anti-Western civilization, disproportionately agnostic and atheist. These are people who really would like to tear down our society, many of them. I'm not saying all, I'm not even saying most. I am saying this. It only takes about 20% of hardcore leftists to run and take control of the university. Why? Because the others are liberals who usually are cowards who don't have the guts that the hard left does to stand up to them in meetings. And that's what I've seen this over and over again. So if you have a Christopher Columbus celebration in the 90s, we have to talk about the rape of the Indians. They're really talking about the rape of American society. What I find striking is that all these people want to stay here. I mean, if I really hated the United States of America and I was so enamored of Cuba, for example, I'd find a way to get over to Cuba. It's only 90 miles from Florida. In fact, I can help pay their way, provided it be a one-way ticket.
Well, you speak about academia and that there are people who are not particularly tolerant. That, of course, would be the public universities. Were you to send a child to a Catholic college, would you say that pretty much now they're in safe ground?
No, there are about 232 Catholic colleges in this country, and the percent that are actually Catholic and are very, very small. I worked at a Catholic college in Pittsburgh.
What do you mean by Catholic college? What makes a Catholic college?
A Catholic college is a school where in the hiring process, they inform the prospective faculty members that you're expected to at least understand and not be hostile to Catholic teachings. That happens almost nowhere. A Catholic college...
How does that happen? How does that come to happen? Aren't they all Catholic professors? Or
No, first of all, they're not Catholic professors. The school that I worked at, the nun who ran it was anti-Catholic. She eventually left the order, ran off because she had an affair with the guy who was the board of trustees, and ran off and left the school. But the thing is, when I left that college, there were 3 people up for the job to take her place. 2 were Protestant women. She was a radical feminist, the one who was leaving, the nun, and one was a Monsignor. And she said very clearly to me that the Monsignor, he's a priest, he's not going to get the job here. And then they pointed out, well, the 2 women weren't Catholic. She said, I don't care about that. So people, if you think that you are going to send your kid to a Catholic school and you'll be taught to be appreciative of Catholicism, then you need to check into the Cardinal Newman Society and find out more of what's going on.
What's the Cardinal Newman Society?
Cardinal Newman Society is an organization based out of Washington, run by Pat Riley, 501c3, like the Catholic League, which monitors Catholic education. For example, just to pick on one university, Georgetown. Georgetown University.
That's a Catholic school.
Catholic school, right. So when Obama went in April of 2009 to speak there, the Obama administration, being secularists themselves, they said, we can't have IHS, the Latin for Jesus, in the background. So could you put a drape over Jesus? And they said, sure we will. But that's no problem. We want the president to be here. So only a school which has lost its moorings would do that. They have a pro-abortion group recognized on the campus at Georgetown University. It's called Hoyas for Choice. Now, they don't have any Nazi organizations at Georgetown because they're against Nazis. I'm against Nazis, too. The difference between me and them is that I'm also against abortion. They're not.
It's a Catholic school.
Well,
fundamental,
look at Notre Dame.
fundamental.
When Barack Obama went to Notre Dame, I was on all over CNN and Fox and MSNBC.
Another Catholic university.
Debating these people. And I said, listen, I don't think that somebody who was a champion of abortion rights, should he be allowed to speak at Notre Dame? Of course he should be allowed to speak at Notre Dame. Should he be honored? Of course he shouldn't be honored. And I said they wouldn't honor a racist or an anti-Semite at Notre Dame, nor should they. The problem with the liberals is they're with me on racism, they're with me on anti-Semitism, but they're not with me on abortion because they're not against abortion. They just think it's unfortunate. I think it's intrinsically evil. That's what my religion teaches.
Well, my concern is it doesn't sound like a particularly hopeful scenario. You talk about academia, both public and Catholic schools,
right,
sort of losing their way. Are the secularists winning?
They've been winning in education for a long time, particularly the multicultural education, which is another club to beat down Western civilization. The good news is this. See, there's always good news and bad news on these things. The advantage that the left has over the conservatives, the traditionalists, which is really most Americans, we are a center-right country, okay? Now, the fact of the matter is that the left has one major advantage. They live for one thing, power. They have a lust for power. They want to control. The average American wants to raise their kids, they pay their taxes, go out on the golf course, go to an amusement park, have a family vacation. These people aren't interested in that. That's for the bourgeoisie, as they like to call it. They're too sophisticated, Frank. They're politically charged. They're going to take control. So even though they're a minority, they have a distinct advantage over us. Another advantage they have. Antonio Gramsci was the Italian Marxist who was a lot brighter than Karl Marx, as far as I'm concerned, because the working class weren't going to be bought off and just go with the communists and overthrow the capitalists. They never did that. Gramsci said, listen, get the left into the areas of communication, into the media, into the schools, into those people who disseminate ideas, the publishing world. And that's where they've had a big effect. So again, you try to get published in this country. I mean, I've been able to do it and others, but the New York Times is not going to review my book. The Washington Post isn't going to review they don't review conservative. They didn't review Mark Levin's best-selling book. They didn't review Michelle Malkin's best-selling books. Okay? So they have that advantage.
They ignore, if they disagree with you, they ignore you?
They ignore you, of course. Now, our side has some advantages. Number one, we always have one thing which the left doesn't have, common sense. And when people get older, they tend to become increasingly basing their views on their experiences. That tends to make them more conservative over time. Also, we're not anti-family. We continue to have children. They're too busy aborting them. Mm-hmm. So as people have families, they tend to be people of faith. They tend to be more likely to be conservative. The most radical people in any society are always single people because they have the least to lose. But once they get married and have kids, they tend to become conservative.
Well, there certainly seems to be cause for concern, though, because if the academics have the youth or the children and they're teaching them, indoctrinating them, we've certainly seen our culture coarsened, particularly on the sexual fronts.
Right.
Is there hope? How do we turn this around?
Well, there is hope. And I'll give you a perfect example. Let's pair back now to November of 2008. I'm not talking about the presidential election because after Lehman Brothers and everybody else crashed in the middle of September, even though McCain was up in the polls after Labor Day, Ronald Reagan coming back from the grave couldn't have beaten a Democrat at that point. The people were fed up with the Republicans lost their conservative step and became bureaucrats, and they got smacked rightly for it. I'm talking about something else that happened. I'm talking about Proposition 8, which was basically a resolution in California to affirm that marriage should be between a man and a woman. We won. We've won in 31 states. The gays are 0 for 31. The only places they win is when the elites in state legislatures and the courts bypass the direct democracy will of the people, okay? So my point is simply this. How did our side win? When academia, as we're talking about, is all in favor of gay marriage, when the cultural elite are in favor of gay marriage, how did we win? Traditional Catholics, evangelical Protestants, Orthodox Jews, many Muslims, and Mormons for the first time getting involved, to say nothing of Latino Americans and most especially African Americans who are much more opposed to gay marriage than white people. Most of those people I just mentioned are religious. I also threw in some ethnic and racial groups. That's a formidable combination. If you can't win with gay marriage in California, it's not like, and you haven't won in Oregon. I mean, that's another very liberal state. It's not likely you can win.
The secularists, they don't give up, though, and there's been
right.
It's sort of like the tide. It just sort of keeps coming. What do you see? Do you see we are headed for gay marriage? And what does that do to our culture? Isn't that just another sign of tolerance?
No, look, blacks were discriminated against in this country. They didn't want us to reinvent a social institution. They wanted to be more of a part of society. What radical gays are asking for us to do is to reinvent a social institution. My point is simply this. If it doesn't matter whether we recognize two men getting married, Tom and Dick get married, what about Harry? What about Tom, Dick, and Harry? See, my principle is this. Marriage is about procreation. By definition, two men can't have a family. Two women can't have a family. And by the way,
they can now because they adopt. They've changed the laws.
But even that's perverse. I'll give you another example.
Why?
On Father's Day, what do you say to the kid who has two mothers? On Mother's Day, what do you say to the kid who has two fathers? This stuff will never work out. And quite frankly, how do you stop then from three people getting married? What about polygamy? I would say this. What the American people need to do is think about it. Why don't we do away with marriage? People will always find a way to fornicate. And if rearing kids in a stable, patterned environment doesn't matter, which of course is the reason why every society in history, I said every society in history, has had marriage in the family. They tried to do away with it voluntarily in the Israeli kibbutz, and the woman wanted to be with her kids all day long. It didn't even work there when they tried voluntarily to get rid of it. Nature beats out on this. Now, where do I think it's going? To get back to your question, my guess is here's what's going to probably happen. I don't think it'll happen in 2012, maybe 2016. Could be 2020. It will be a major issue in a presidential election. Question before the people will be, should we have a constitutional amendment affirming marriage between a man and a woman? My guess is that eventually this will happen, and eventually we will win. And then, in many states, there will be civil unions. You can have civil unions after you lock in constitutionally marriage between a man and woman. But you can't have civil unions first, because if you do, then you've greased the slide ineluctably to have gay marriage. That's where I see it coming out.
Which brings us to the legal area. You have a section in your book, Lawyers in Sabotage. Talk to me a little bit about that. What do you see going on in that area?
Well, here, there's some good news on this thing, too. I mean, just like, in academia used to rule everything in the culture, but now because of the internet and cable television, we have a lot more conservative voices out there. Same thing is true here. The ACLU, I wrote my PhD dissertation, 2 books on them. They were founded in January of 1920 by Roger Baldwin. I met him in June of 1978 on Hudson Street in New York City in his home. I interviewed him at some length. He was actually a nice guy, but obviously wrong-headed. When they were founded in 1920, they listed their 10 objectives. All of them were, every component of the First Amendment was there except for freedom of religion. They've always had a hostility toward religion, but they're not alone. The ACLU is not alone. You have Americans United for Separation of Church and State, used to be Protestant and Other Americans for Separation of Church and State, an explicitly anti-Catholic organization. I talk about it in Secular Sabotage. They wanted cardinals to be stripping of their citizenship in the United States. I mean, I think they're more of a fascist group than anything else. The ACLU, of course. But you have American Atheists and a lot of these secular humanist organizations, People for the American Way.
Are they trying to use the law in the courts to advance their agenda?
Oh, absolutely. They've reinvented the First Amendment. The First Amendment was written by James Madison. We know what he meant because he was asked, what does it mean? He said the so-called Establishment Clause, which isn't a clause to begin with, and we don't have a Religious Liberty Clause versus an Establishment Clause. What we have is one basic premise, which is that the government cannot encroach on religion. It doesn't say that religion can't express itself. Now, what we've done in the law schools, we have reinvented the First Amendment to make it sound as if anytime religion affects that which is in the public square, it is somehow anathema. As I keep reminding people, we didn't get civil rights for blacks except because of people like Reverend Martin Luther King using the pulpit in the churches to get people to say that it was wrong to be discriminatory against black people. Now, liberals think that's great. They think it's great when Catholic bishops come out against nuclear weapons. If the same Catholic bishops come out against gay marriage, they violated church and state. It's a game. They're lying. There's no principle for these people. It's all politics.
And an interesting time of year is always Christmas time. When there are nativity scenes around, that seems to provoke some legal action.
Yeah, it's amazing. On December the 17th, last month in New York City, we put up a nativity scene, a life-size manger scene for about 2 weeks. Jews put up the menorah. I mean, I haven't heard any suffering apoplexy. I haven't heard anybody having brain aneurysms. In Radio City Music Hall, they have had these Christmas spectaculars since 1933. They've changed parts of it. One part they never change is the ending. They have a live nativity where the animals come in there around baby Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. There have been no demonstrations in the streets. There have been no protests.
The ceiling has never collapsed?
No. Nobody parachuting out of the sky. I don't understand it. What's going on? Look, this idea of dumbing down and neutering Christmas is another example of secularists. They don't like religion. So they say we call it a holiday parade, to which I say, what holiday are you actually celebrating? They can't use the C word, Christmas. It's a linguistic dance. It's like a minefield. We're going to have presents. Why are you having presents? Well, we want to celebrate the winter solstice. Why don't you celebrate the summer solstice and do it around Father's Day? I mean, this whole thing is madness. I mean, it's madness on steroids.
Just one more area on the legal front. You talk in your book about the United States Supreme Court. And there came a time, of course, when now Chief Justice Roberts was presented as a candidate.
Those Catholics.
And an interesting quote, and I want to put this quote up on the screen. This is National Public Radio's Nina Totenberg, again from your book. With respect to Justice Roberts, don't forget, his wife was an officer, a high officer of a pro-life organization. He's got adopted children. I mean, he's a conservative Catholic. I mean, basically what she's saying is, how could he even be considered for the post?
Well, the adoptive children was the clincher. Then we know that he's a Catholic, right? I mean, it's astonishing. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg used to work at the ACLU. She's a champion of abortion rights. Everybody says that's fine for her. I mean, it shouldn't matter what your religion is. I mean, quite frankly, I don't want Catholic judges, let me be clear about this, ruling from the bench and taking their cues from the Catholic Church. They should make their decisions based on precedent and based on constitutional law if you're dealing with constitutional law. A Catholic legislator, it's entirely right for him or her to consult the corpus of teachings in the Catholic Church because you're arguing about what's in the best interest of society. In other words, a lawmaker has a different charge than a judge. But this business about people saying we have too many Catholics on the court, the same liberals who make that argument, they would take 9 Nancy Pelosi pro-abortion Catholics on the Supreme Court before they'd ever take 1 Nat Handorf atheist Jew pro-lifer on the Supreme Court. It has nothing to do with religion. Just like they say we have to have more blacks in the Supreme Court. Well, we have one, Clarence Thomas. Well, we don't mean blacks like him. Well, we have women in government like Jean Kirkpatrick was a very good woman. So, well, we don't mean women like her. So it's not ancestry, it's not anatomy, it's politics. And these people lie because that's what they do.
Bill, you're a very busy man. I can see from your book. You never stop. What do you do for fun? Do you ever kick back and have a beer? Or?
I do. I'm Irish, and I play to the stereotype, and very gladly so. I love to go out with the boys on the weekends and go down to the pubs and have a few beers and watch a game. I go to the Yankee game with my girls every year and take them to...
You have children?
I have 2 girls. They're 2 wonderful girls, and they're not as big a Yankee fan as I am. They're just, like a lot of girls are just out having a good time for themselves in their 20s. But I love to cook, actually. Okay. I love great food. My favorite are Italian food and steakhouses. And New York, of course, has got the greatest. I love the red wine. No, I relax, and I exercise. I do a lot of fast walking and things of that nature. And I do have a sense of humor. You've got to have a sense of humor in this because people say to me, well, Bill, you're always so serious. Well, look, if I beat up on liberals for a couple of minutes every night on TV, that doesn't mean I don't have another side to me. And I don't think that because I disagree with it, you're a bad person or you're going to hell. I'm not into that, okay? By the way, Catholics say, we know there's a heaven and a hell. The Catholic Church has never said that we know that anybody is in hell. So I don't make those judgments. You can be a good guy and have wrong judgment and the wrong decision making and the like, and you can still be a good person. And I think that has to be said. There's too much of this vitriol. Because you're wrong on your ideas, then you must be a bad person. Don't count me in that category.
Very good. Getting back to an area of your book, Bill, that I found disturbing because you talk about a lot of the secularists' attack on Christianity or Catholicism. You have a section in your book called Self-Sabotage, Catholicism. What's going on inside the church, the Catholic Church, that is cause for alarm for you?
Well, I thought the book would be somewhat dishonest, Frank, if I just talked about the secularists in the culture and didn't look upon what secularists are doing within the house of Catholicism and the house of Protestantism. And there are people here, and I don't mean liberal people who are just gently pushing the envelope here. I'm talking about people out to sabotage Catholicism.
Catholics.
That's right. I opened that chapter with a statement by a nun who said to these Catholic dissidents, referring to John Paul II, we've been waiting for a long time for someone in this church to die. And everybody here knows exactly whom I'm talking about. We have pro-abortion Catholics, pro-abortion nuns. The National Coalition of Nuns is pro-abortion. How do I know that? Because they go into the courts that way. You've got Catholics for a Free Choice. They're not really Catholic at all. They're funded by George Soros and by the Ford Foundation. We have priests who reject the core teachings of the Catholic Church and then expected to be accepted in good standing in the Catholic Church. We have the National Catholic Reporter, which is about as anti-Catholic of a publication as I could possibly imagine.
Well, this is not a minor problem you're talking about.
Oh, no, it's not a minor problem. But here's the good news. Their best years were the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The 90s in the Catholic Church was a decade of transition. In the first decade of the 21st century, we've seen, I think, a push by more conservatives to recapture their church. The dioceses, which are the most orthodox, are not having the problem getting the priest. The same is true with those orders of nuns and priests. They're not having the most difficult time. Same is true in the Protestant community. Protestants have been wrecked by people like Reverend Spong and others who have long since given up their Christianity and out to assault. Look what they've done to the Episcopal Church. They've practically destroyed it. They're in free fall. The mainline Protestant denominations are in free fall.
Speaking about problems within the church, certainly the priest sexual abuse crisis.
Yes. I don't go away from that. I deal with that head on.
Well, I'm sure it has been presented to you as how can you say that the Catholic Church is worth listening to when this is going on?
Here's my answer to that. It's not the teachings that failed, it's some of the teachers. In other words, some of the teachers, meaning the priest, let their id dominate as opposed to their vow of celibacy. And so what you do when somebody fails is you give them a massage and you help them over the bar. You don't lower the bar. Had every priest who had gone wayward strictly followed the teachings of the Catholic Church, he couldn't have done what he had done. Everybody who was killed in the name of Jesus Christ has violated the teachings of Jesus Christ in order to accomplish that end. If I thought the teachings were corrupt, that would be different. The teachings are splendid. They're magnificent. And if we could all live up to them, we'd have the best society in the world. So no, just because some teachers fail does not impugn the teachings.
And again, we're talking about a distinct...
tiny minority of people out of the timeline is the 60s to the 80s. Mid-60s to the 80s, where we had this homosexual predatory problem in the Catholic Church. And let me be clear about that. I said homosexual problem. I am not saying that most gay priests are molesters. That would be wrong. I am saying that most of the molesters have been gay. That's accurate. Beyond that, I'm saying that the majority of the victims have been post-pubescent. It's not my opinion. This comes from the John Jay School of Criminal Justice, which looked into this. There's a word for that in the English language. It's not called pedophilia. It's called homosexuality. Obviously, there's a problem. The Irish have a bigger problem, and so do the Native Americans, with alcohol than the Chinese and the Italians. That doesn't mean that every Irishman and Indian is going to go out and have to become an alcoholic. We can't bury our heads if there's a problem with homosexuality in terms of this kind of behavior.
Bill, we've had a wide-ranging discussion. I appreciate you being on the show. I recommend that people take a look at Bill Donahue's new book, Secular Sabotage, How Liberals Are Destroying Religion and Culture in America. Bill, thanks very much for being on our program.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Good to see
Thank
you.
coming home soon.
Other news, negotiations broke down again.
Daddy, Daddy! Jared! Jared, wait! Come on. Ah!
You got me.
So how was work?
Brutal. One meeting after another. I got a ton to do tonight.
At the end of the day, when the weight of the world is upon you,
Daddy doesn't want to play. Hey!
isn't it amazing
All right.
how the weight of their love can lift you up again?
Hey, you guys coming to dinner? Hey, guys.
For a free brochure about rediscovering the joy of your children, call 1-800-A-FAMILY and focus on the family.